Classification: redacted. Country: Chile and Germany. Subject: German scientists' article on flying discs. Date distributed: 31 July 1950. Number of pages: 1. Date of information: prior to mid-1950. Supplement: this is unevaluated information. Source: translation of an article submitted by Dr. Edward Ludi for publication in Condor, a German-language magazine published in Chile. The article is titled "The Mystery of the Flying Discs," discussing their possible explanations. Analyst's note: the significant conclusion drawn by the scientist is that the old handicap of boundary layer over a moving object or airfoil has been exploited to produce an advantageous reaction, and is the factor controlling the success of the flying saucer type of airfoil. The Mystery of the Flying Discs, a contribution to its possible explanation. By Dr. Edward Ludwig, Santiago, Chile, A.V. Cristobal, 1916. Though the continuously reappearing reports on the appearance of new, mysterious aircraft of unknown construction should be considered with severe skepticism as the result of a sort of mass hypnosis. Nevertheless, some of the detailed and coinciding accounts of technically trained observers deserve attention and permit one to draw conclusions as to the probable classification of these new aircraft, since so far the observations have been made mainly in the dark, which means that only the luminous parts of the craft are visible. Every report brings the description of shining discs or circles. If one should discard the absurd conjecture that these aircraft originate from beyond this earth, then it is easy to arrive at the conclusion that the shining circles bear a relation to the exhaust of a rotary gas turbine. The possibility exists that the rotor of a turbine is used at the same time as a stabilizing top, and is therefore fixed vertically to the level of the other turbine rings, which in the darkness produces the effect of the rings of Saturn. These observations remind me of a completely new type of aircraft which was developed during the years I worked in the research plant of Professor Junkers in Dessau, which was attached to the airplane factories known all over the world. I do not know how many of my co-workers are still alive today, but I do know that Dr. Bach, professor at the Technical High School of Berlin, and who was at that time my chief and friend of many years, has been deported to the Soviet Union. The name of Professor Bach was never widely known due to his modest character, but he may have been the greatest genius of German airplane theoretics, and later, in view of his extraordinary faculties, he was named head constructor of the Ministry of German Airways and director of the German Institute of Airways Research in Berlin-Adlershof. In order to explain to a wider circle of readers the basic idea of the new aircraft, I should like to submit first the following explanations. The first physician and mathematician who considered the new science of aerodynamics after the aerodynamic commencement of purely experimental developments of aircraft construction was the Russian Professor Yukovsky of Moscow. Before the First World War, and together with my esteemed teacher, Dr. Kuta from the Technical High School of Stuttgart, Germany, he developed the theory of airplane wing beam. Professor Kuta succeeded in establishing the famous differential equation of the boundary stratum, which for the first time throws light on the processes in current particles, and which in any case explains for the first time theoretically the reason why a plane wing can bear a load while moving forward through the air. Since then, the Kuta-Yukovsky theory of airplane wing beam has been the foundation of all aerodynamics. As already mentioned, the core of this work is the so-called boundary stratum, which consists of the thin layer of air in which the transition of velocity 0 to the velocity of the moving object takes place. If the object is streamlined, then the boundary stratum will endeavor not to sever, no whirlwinds will occur, and therefore no loss of energy will take place in that stratum. Since nature always functions most economically, it always tries to avoid loss of energy, and therefore a plane wing would rather bear weight than cause a disruption of the course of the current and let the wing drop. The logical conclusions based on these theoretic discoveries were obvious. Already in the year 1915, Professor H.C. Bormann, also from the Technical High School of Stuttgart, received a patent on the split wing through which the artificially interruption of the course of the current, the tearing of the boundary stratum, and the consequent breaking and diminishing of the landing speed would be attained. From the theory of the airplane wing beam, Flettner proved that the conditions of a rotating object are similar to those which appear in a translatoration movement. Thus evolved the Flettner rotor. Professor Junkers, head of the well-known airplane works in Dessau, who in the year 1915 received his path-breaking patent on the one-piece metal wing without junctures, ordered a research group, which was headed by Professor Dr. Bach, and to which was headed by Professor Dr. Bach. I had the honor to belong to investigate to what extent the uplift of a wing could be increased through the attachment of a Flettner rotor in the shape of a cylinder turning at great speed. The cylinder was 2/3 of the length of the wing and was installed in the nose of the wing, where it could best be adapted to the wing's profile. To assist us with aerodynamic problems, the Göttingen University sent us Professor Prantl. The experiments turned out to be extremely difficult and involved many casualties. The purely technical question of the speedy uplift of a long cylinder of light construction could not be solved at that time. Inexplicable vibrations and axle breakages occurred time after time, which Professor Junkers ordered us to investigate, and with which we were occupied for months. Not less than 4 men, all experienced and tried pilots of the First World War and outstanding engineers, died in these experiments. It was clear to us that only a gas turbine could produce the direct uplift of the cylinder. However, since meanwhile more pressing problems awaited solution, experiments with this type of aircraft were interrupted. Meanwhile, the Aerodynamic Experimental Institute of Göttingen made new and enlightening discoveries. Professor Betz found that supersonic speeds, such as are produced by quickly rotating propellers, created entirely new conditions. This investigation, however, needed the furnishing of a wind tunnel for supersonic speeds, which could only be built many years later, and which after the war was forwarded to the United States, where it greatly amazed all scientists. Now light was shed on many things. It was found that the tearing of the boundary stratum at supersonic speeds involved much greater resistance, so that an object with full atmospheric pressure practically bangs from the upper layer of air, and theoretically experiences there the same uplift as an object of the same surface in the water. The converting of the revelations found in research into reality, however, needed the solution of the starting force through a gas turbine or another equivalent machine or instrument. Many heretofore unexplained phenomena now found an explanation. For example, it had often been observed that the range of quickly rotating missiles' Drollwirkung was much greater than could be explained according to the laws of ballistics. Paradoxical explanations were sought for this, such as that the air resistance decreases with growing speeds. Today we know that these quickly rotating missiles swim in the surrounding layers of air, and therefore lose part of their weight. Full clarification was brought about only with supersonic speeds, which were obtained in the experiments with rockets V2, and were arrived at by flights of many hundreds and thousands of kilometers, and which can only be explained by the way in which these missiles literally hang in the air. The surprise of the specialized scientists the world over at the astounding results of the German V2 was not less than that which is produced today by the appearance of the mysterious flying disc. In the same way in which the ingenious discernment of Professor Junkers pointed the way for airplane construction for the whole world, thus also may his idea of attaching Flettner rotors have a revolutionary effect. Airplanes of this type must have such an enormous carrying capacity as to be practically comparable to amphibious planes of the same size. The lack of uplift produced by the Flettner rotors can easily be achieved through the oblique position of the entire airplane with a positive starting angle in connection with the enormously high starting speed. The attaching of speedily rotating tops assures side stability. There is also the possibility of attaching horizontal auxiliary propellers of the helicopter type. And what about the question of the starting force? The safety of such an aircraft stands and falls on the starting force of the cylinders, and only too well do I remember the casualties inflicted by the lack of it. As I mentioned before, only the development of a gas turbine can bring the solution, since it consists only of rotating parts and works with the dependability of a steam engine. There is only one more question to be answered. Could such an aircraft carry enough fuel for worldwide journeys? This question is easily answered in the affirmative. In the first place, such an aircraft has a tremendous carrying capacity, as we have already seen. And in the second place, chemical research has made astounding developments in this respect. We know today, quite apart from atomic energy, carriers of energy of unsuspected power and duration. It should be remembered that the missiles of German anti-tank weapons were coated with chemical substances which melted up to 20 cm of steel plates within fractions of a second. D-text_energy carriers of this type, if applicable to a gas turbine, should make an action radius possible which far surpasses that of gasoline engine. The future will show whether the flying discs are only the products of imagination or whether they are the results of a far advanced German science which possibly, as well as the nearly finished atomic bombs, may have fallen into the hands of the Russian stonks.